Well, as you're no doubt aware, Sony had quite the monumental cock-up last week and the PSN went down. We're going to talk about it and actually the deeper stuff behind it, because this is actually a pretty bad thing for Sony. Now in the immediate it blew. Like, I could not buy and download Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, even though I had a free Saturday that I kind of dedicated to that. Then Krispy Kreme's, well, at least they got their free marketing donut division into gear and gave people free donuts. But of course, if you had a digital PS5 or a PS5 Pro, and didn't buy the upcharged disk drive, well, yeah, tough shit. You were basically left unable to use the stuff you had bought. So not only is this bad, right, but it directly undermines trust in Sony's, well, entire strategy. All that it takes is the root of an idea to make somebody not buy a console. Just a little bit of friction sticking in their mind, a little story that says, I remember bad news about this company and bad news about this service. That's actually going to harm them. And worst of all, Sony failed to communicate properly here, and as we're going to examine the details today, you'll really get a sense of just how built on sand all of this is, and some of the deep, more existential long-term problems this actually poses for gaming. It all began around midnight on Friday, it lasted for a day, and it was resolved around midnight on Saturday. Now, Sony really said nothing of substance initially, and they haven't said much of substance since. And what is, I guess, a little funny is they did say things, as an example, this pre-scheduled marketing, which really did go down well. It was all about the benefits of why you should put an M.2 SSD in your PS5, which would be perfect for the games that you couldn't play on your console, a console that you couldn't use, and an SSD that you couldn't download any games to. Now, by 2 a.m, they did acknowledge there was a problem. They later apologized. They gave people who had PS Plus 5 days of free service. And as for the problem, they just said, it's an operational issue, which is to basically say they didn't really tell us what the problem was. And not knowing is actually worrisome there, right? I mean, if you take the rather infamous 23-day long outage of 2011, well, for Sony, they say that cost them $171 million. It also really shook confidence, and that's about $7.5 million a day. But the real worry with that was user data, because user data spanning 77 million customers was, was accessed. That was quite bad. Now, in that case, people ended up getting 2 games for free and 30 days of PS Plus. So at first glance, right, this is 1 day versus 23, and we haven't heard anything about like a massive security breach. But from a strategic perspective and from a business perspective, this actually hits how Sony operates everything far harder than that did in 2011. Physical game sales absolutely dominated the PS3 era, right? And fewer games were big live games. But 2025 is nothing like that. So here's a fun sample of things. You've got Bungie, a Sony-owned studio, running a new event in Destiny 2, a Sony game, right? The players on Sony's own console could not access. Helldivers was celebrating its first anniversary with giveaways that users could not redeem. And marketing partner, which does mean like business relationship, Monster Hunter Wilds had to extend its second open beta, which kind of blew. That's chaos, and that's just the big expected types of chaos. Games that required multiplayer servers were just knocked out by this. People could not download games that they owned, and that would include things like, say, if you got a Civ 7 edition that had advanced access. Good luck. I couldn't get Kingdom Come 2, people couldn't buy games or download games, but it actually goes even deeper than that, because PSN actually covers so many more services. It includes video stuff, and even loads of single-player games that actually do require an online connection. At the very least, they will like phone home to like verify the purchase when a game is started up. So that actually means that even if you had downloaded a game, if that game was on your console, well, the servers that would validate your purchase were also down, so you could not access that game that you bought, which really does reinforce the point that you do not own your games, you own a license, and if their protection system that validates that your license is legit, if that goes down, well, you owning a license doesn't really matter. But more than anything, when you wrap it all up together, people realize just how little their PS5 is able to do without an internet connection. And not because of some very understandable technical reason, although there are some, but the point is, all of this is Sony's overt choice, Sony's copy protections, Sony's digital strategy, and nothing highlights that more then this next part of the story, which feels like a bit of an absurd comedy. Does It Play are a group of preservation activists, and seeing this whole story go down, they came across an ex-user, Papa Guy, who did a bit of an experiment, right? So he disconnects his disk drive, the external disk drive, and then he tried to set it up again during the outage. And what he got from his experiment was a PS5 with a connected disk drive that refused to work. It was basically just a brick attached to a brick, which is absurd because there this guy was, with a PS5, with a disk drive, and with a collection of game discs. And these things run, but you cannot put them together and access your games. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying that this is a big problem that you are going to face in a very immediate practical sense. This is an edge case. The chances of you trying to activate your disk drive during an outage are absurdly slim. But hang on a second, the words that came out of my mouth were, activate your disk drive, which is absolutely absurd. I mean, especially if you're, a 30-year-old boomer who remembers when disk drives were a commonly used thing in your PC. This is insane. So it's the principle that matters here. It feels wrong that you can own games. I mean, the thing about digital is, digital makes it so goddamn clear that, you just own the license. At least with a disc, you're sort of duped into thinking you own the game because you have a box. The box says it's a game, and in that box is a disc, and that disc runs the game. So you'd think that you own the game and you can use it on your own hardware that you've bought that should run that game. But no, you can't, because of how Sony have designed their entire system. And this begs the obvious question then. What happens when those servers are turned off? Well, who better to ask than Sony themselves? Seeing all this, Does It Play sent a letter to Sony. It's this letter, and they asked them about the future, and they pressed them for answers on the nature of planned obsolescence that this online dependency creates. And Sony replied instantly, which is actually not a mark of great customer service. It's because it's Sony's system, which was an AI chatbot. A chatbot that referred to Sony in the third person, which I suppose keeps them safe, and the chatbot said that it could not answer their questions. But the chatbot did conclude by backing all of us up, because it said this, and remember, this is the Sony chatbot, quote, Sony should make provisions for the future of physical media to ensure that players who prefer it can continue enjoying their games for years to come. So you know what? Great. Let's put that chatbot in charge. It clearly gets it. Now, Sony have of course not spoken to this broader issue, but an ex-leader of Sony Worldwide Studios that many people within games will know, Sean Layden, has. He's been just going and doing a lot of press and interviews, and when asked about this sort of thing, he said, quote, if we go diskless, how much of my market is not able to make that jump? Can users in rural Italy get a decent internet connection to enjoy games? Which is absolutely right. But they then followed up with the more sobering reality because, let's be real, it's romantic playing games in your house in rural Italy. Sony doesn't give a shit about that. And Sean did say as much, that ultimately Sony have done their research and Sony knows there's a tipping point. Now, Sean does think that it will be hard for Sony to go all diskless even in the next generation. But make no mistake, if they run the numbers and that tipping point is hit, they absolutely will. Statistics help us make this point. US game physical retail sales fell below $2 billion for the first time since the year 2000, right? 2000. Lowest in 25 years. GameStop did this tweet, right, about, buy physical games. But that's a death spasm. So get this, a pretty legendary analyst, Matt Piscatella, summarized his firm's data, and he said that physical software spending is down by more than 50% since 2021, which is only 4 years ago, and it's down 85% since its 2008 peak. And look, 2008 was quite the banger, and it had a lot of things to really increase those physical sales, like Guitar Hero, like the Wii. But the trend is clear, and if you think about the numbers that Matt shared, it's only accelerating. Which is obvious. Both major console players would rather sell you a digital-only console. You'll save money in, the immediate if you buy that digital console. So think about it this way, right? If GameStop sells you a digital-only console, they might make some money from that sale, right? But they make that money at the risk of losing your lifetime value as a customer because you won't be buying your games at GameStop, you'll be buying them on the digital store. And of course, this is a feedback loop. As more shops close, the digital rise will only hasten, which is exactly what Sony will want. And I don't mean this is for some horrible, nefarious reason. It is simple numbers. selling digitally is absurdly more profitable and efficient. It gives them full control over pricing, and for consumers, even though you could say you might pay a little bit more money and it's a worse deal, well, time is money and you don't have to go to the shop. You don't have to wait for Amazon to deliver your order or maybe have the mail person, any of that stuff. So there are lots of reasons why people do enjoy digital, but there is a bit of an American cherry on top of all of this, at least in that domestic market. So the tariffs are delayed. Yes, got to talk about the tariffs, but the tariffs still could happen. And Matt had this to say, quote, "With 25% tariffs on imports from Mexico on the way, I can see a sharp downtick in the number of disc-based games that get released physically in the US, as much of that production infrastructure is in Mexico." So that's fairly interesting. I guess you can enjoy some tariffs on your China-manufactured console and your Mexican-manufactured games. Awesome. The way it works is the tariffs will be paid for by the importer, and the idea, obviously, is that it's to encourage domestic production of those goods. Now, in theory, right, those costs like physical game disc production are only 5% of the $70 price tag, so around $3.50, and the tariffs would only bring that to $4.38, which is barely anything. But across hundreds of thousands of copies being sold and distributed, that actually does add up. And there's other managerial hurdles and quite a few other things that do sort of happen on top of the tariffs. And perhaps even more than a tiny amount of money, it is risk, it is a lack of predictability, and those things are important for a business. And of course, what they can also be is an excuse, an easy excuse for not bothering to release a physical game or to just raise prices across the board. A decent example is quite a lot of companies use the looming tariffs to just sort of be like, we've been wanting to cut staff. Because of the tariffs, we've got to do it right now. It ended up being an excuse. Which is all to say there is a death spiral in physical game sales and in physical games retail. And that's actually really good for Sony, and it's basically their strategy. The words that came out of Sean Layden's mouth were, "There will be a tipping point." And he's right, there will be one. Now, he doesn't see it being the PS6, and Sony do at least make good margin by selling those really way too expensive external disk drives, but thinking about the future, it's absolutely goddamn clear, right? Digital means 30% of every sale goes to Sony, or Microsoft, or Steam, or whoever, right? It means zero retail cut for your Sony-owned games. And hey, if you're spending $315 million in Spider-Man 2 to the point where you need 7.5 million sales at full RRP on your own store, right, where it's the most financially efficient, goddamn, you're going to be chasing that damn profitability everywhere you can. And it also means no pesky lending of games. As an example, one of the guys in our team, Matt, he lent me his copy of Returnal. I played Returnal and I was like, okay, I'm done with Returnal. That's obviously really bad for Sony. And of course, if you've actually used the PSN store, you'll notice the UI flow of that sucker, right? Whenever you go to buy a game, I don't know about you, but mine always defaults to one of the most expensive premium editions of a game. There have been times I've clicked in a game and I'm like, what the hell? Why is this £99? No, it turns out I've got to go into a sub-menu that is very much not obvious to then select the version of the game that is a reasonable price. Obviously, they make a lot of money through that UI, guiding people to the more expensive, more profitable thing. So the point here is that Sony's dominant position does not make them bulletproof. This outage makes that absolutely obvious, because this outage directly targets the big thrust of their business in going all digital, and that will erode people's confidence. And frankly, the fact that we haven't got a proper explanation does show that they don't really think we're owed one. This is the same damn mindset that led to their whole PC misfire with PSN. That's actually something that they have finally walked back, and you can watch this video next to learn about that story.